Welcome to the final sprint in our marathon session, where I'm joined once again by special guest Gary Hibbard. I'm Stuart Reed, and this is 0 Day Cyber. If you haven't caught up on the previous 2 episodes of our trilogy, make sure you do, as we've tackled the subject of data privacy, Gary's reaction to proposals for the NHS to open up our digital records to third parties, along with his view on government suggestions to overhaul GDPR. Now, it's great to have you back on the show, Gary. Last time we began exploring the growing and, sadly it seems, successful use of ransomware by cybercriminals. If an organization is faced with a ransomware attack, what advice would you give them? Should they pay the ransom?
Now this is the part where I sit firmly on the fence, because it's a difficult one. It depends, and I rarely say it depends. My personal view on this is no, you shouldn't pay. But that's because I sit in a very comfortable position right now, and I haven't been attacked, and I haven't had ransomware carried out on me. But if you are sat in that seat and your data is encrypted and you can't get that back, then you have to weigh up all the options available to you. Prevention is always better than cure. So this is why I think it's really important to really start to think about this problem right now, and ask again, another action for people to do if you run a business is to sit down with your board of directors or with your partners and play out the scenario. You've just been hit with ransomware. This is what's just happened. What do we do now? Because you really need to start to have those conversations, because it's down to you to make those decisions. Currently, it's not against the law to pay a ransom. Is it ethically correct and morally correct? That's another question for you to answer yourself. Now, if you are paying a ransom, then you are, if in some effects, you are actually funding crime. So depending upon which sector you're in as well, may determine whether you should or should not pay a ransom. But it's a very, very difficult one, and I think each and every single situation is going to call for some very deep soul searching. But what I would finally say on this point is, if you do pay a ransom, you've got to remember that you are dealing with criminals. So if it doesn't work, if they don't give you your keys back, if they don't give you your data, or if they give you your data but then demand further funds, who are you going to complain to? You can't go to the police or some other regulator and say, hey, these guys aren't as honest as they said they were going to be. So you are in a very difficult situation, and I sympathize with anyone who's caught up in that. But I think it has to be at this point in time down to the individual and the individual organization to weigh up the pros and cons of doing it. But as I often say to people, put ransomware or put security on the agenda before it becomes the agenda. So have that conversation today whilst the sun is shining and your feet are dry, and just see how it would play out. And then if at all it makes you feel uncomfortable, start to look at the preventative controls that you can put in place.
You touch on there around the point of preventative measures, and of course the advice around reducing the likelihood of ransomware, or at least its likely impact, isn't particularly new. It's don't open suspicious attachments, create regular backups of files, patch your PC and AV software. It's all pretty sensible and arguably easy stuff to do. So why are ransom attacks still so successful?
Complacency. Because there's an element of complacency in this. It's never going to happen to me. We're bad at calculating the risk. It's why would anyone attack me? Why would anyone ransomware attack me? I'm just I'm just a florist, or I'm an accountant, or I'm a manufacturer, etc., etc. We need to be checking that these things are happening. We talk about making sure that your systems are patched. Well, our systems, our networks now are so complex that my question to you is, how do you know that they're being patched effectively? And if you are, with all due respect to our IT brothers and sisters out there, we know that the board want to hear good news. So I think quite often what we need to do is educate ourselves as a C-suite to be able to ask some very serious questions and seek some really good evidence that patch management is in place. Maybe bringing in external expertise so that you do have that external viewpoint to come and kick the tires, make sure that everything's working as it should be. But we accept what our IT provider tell us without really checking. We're not testing our recovery plans. We're not testing or training our teams to be on the lookout for these things. You mentioned there about being on the lookout for attachments and emails and all of these kinds of things. But cyber criminals are fully aware that we're training our people on those things, so they change those methods as well. And there is no such thing as a perfect system, and there's no such thing as 100% secure. So what we need to start to do is develop security in depth and have layered approaches to security. We talk about the 7 layers of security. The 8th layer is, of course, people. So we shouldn't forget about those full 8 layers and ask ourselves, at what point do we need to improve our security, whether it be from a technical, a process, a policy, or from a people perspective?
You talk about the layers there, and clearly it is a complex challenge. Do you think organizations are at a point now where they're becoming slightly more calculated in their perceptions of cyber risk in general? Are organizations making that judgment on trading off investing now on security versus simply spending the money on the recovery if or when a breach happens? If so, are they making the right choices, do you think?
I mean, it's a difficult one to answer because different organizations will take different approaches. The organizations that I come across certainly are investing in preventative measures. And when I say preventative, they are now starting to look at the full gamut of where the risks are. So they are certainly more educated than they were, say, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when I first started in this world, that they recognize that this is a business issue rather than it just being an IT problem. So yes, let's focus on getting the IT in the right place. But also let's start to think about the people as well and make sure that we shore up the policies. But there are still organizations out there, Stuart, that are ticking a box, doing the bare minimum, because they just are, again, just thinking, well, it'll never happen to me, so I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. And it tends to be the ones who are, the ones who are more entrepreneurial. They're the ones who say, I ask them if they've got a business plan. Part of my engagement, I often ask is, what's your mission, your vision, what's your objectives? Do you have a business plan? And if they don't have a business plan, this is the smaller organizations especially, and if they don't have a business plan, then it typically tells me that these are the kind of people who are going to be a little bit more gung-ho about their approach. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that I know what I'm going to be faced with when I'm having conversations with them. That if I say, right, okay, we've got to think about a 12-month strategy here, or look at a security standard like ISO 27001, which takes some time to implement and longer to embed, yeah, you're going to lose them on that. So the ones I come across, thankfully, really do see the value in this, because it comes down to trust and building trust. The ones who aren't quite as forward thinking, a bit more reactive. They're the ones who are more likely just to simply say, well, I've got cyber insurance, I've got business insurance, interruption insurance. I'll just claim on that when the bad thing happens, and we'll be back up and running within a day or so. And you're kind of saying, well, yeah, but by then your reputation's already in the toilet. So your business might be back up and running, but not so much your business.
So given all of the experience that you've had and the advice that you do give to organizations, if you could distill it down to just one piece of advice to organizations about their cybersecurity strategies, what would that be?
Well, I've already said it. If there was one piece, I'm going to say the line that I always say, which is put security on the agenda before it becomes the agenda. I think that's the advice I would give you. Talk about it in your board meetings, in your, if you're a small organization and it's just the three of you, it's just the two of you, then make it a standing agenda item to talk about information security, data protection, cyber security, whatever you want to call it, but the protection of data and the protection of your business, because that's ultimately what it's about. Because there isn't a business in the land, an organization in the land that does not rely upon data.
This has been hugely informative and educational. Thank you very much, Gary. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show for our marathon 3-episode stretch. And you've given us plenty to think about, and also practical insights that we can all apply regarding both data hygiene and reducing ransomware risks. That does close this episode, and indeed our trilogy of 0 Days Cyber specials. So thank you once again to extra special guest Gary Hibbert, the Professor of Communicating Cyber at Cyberfort Group, for making all that possible. And of course, a big thanks to all of you at home for tuning in. If you like what you saw, please do join us again. And of course, tell your friends, family, and colleagues. Also, if you want to ask Gary any questions on what we've discussed here over the last 3 shows, give us feedback or suggest an icebreaker question of your own for my next special guest, or perhaps just to catch up on previous episodes, find us at 0days_cyber or 0dayscyber.net. Thank you very much for joining us, and see you again soon.